no winning with me. It's too stubborn.
So I'll fight anyway. Just move on.
6%. Anyone have a phone, just in case this thing dies on me? To record? 3%. Okay.
I have 94%.
94%. That should do it. Is it okay?
Yeah. What do you record on?
You a recorder?
Swipe up and then search voice.
Thanks.
You know, if I put this on power save,
Right there,
it probably
green.
should work.
Is it green thing on?
That's a voicemail which I do not use.
Yeah, if it's on power, I think it should be okay.
Recorder? Yeah, what's the thing? You got it?
I think it should be okay.
Yeah.
Ikar is the Ratzin. I think it should be okay. I just put on power save. Should be okay. Oh, you got it.
I searched voice.
You want airplane mode?
Yeah.
Search recorder, nothing comes up.
You want airplane mode? So no.
Alright, we should be good. Alright. Okay, so last week we began a new mitzvah, learning a new sugya of the Isser, the prohibition of taking collateral from a person that owes, from a loiva, from a borrower, from a person in debt, Bizroya, taking it by force. That's what we talked about, the prohibition of taking Mushkin Bizroya. So that's what we spoke about. Again, just a chazor for a few minutes, the basic concept, and then we'll move on a little bit within that yesod. So it's coming from a pasuk. You don't have this in front of you, but it's coming from a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. Again, a couple pasukim. Again, the pasuk is Kisasha B'Riyacha Mashas Muma. If you lend your friend any amount of money, again, regardless of the amount of money, regardless of whether he's rich or poor, it's nothing to do with that. And comes the time of payment and he's not paying. And so what you want to do now is to take a mashkin, to take a collateral. You're not allowed to go into his home to take the mashkin. You're not allowed to go into his home to take the mashkin. Rather, you have to remain outside the house. And the person that owes you the money, so he has to bring the mashkin to you on the outside. Now that's the pasuk. The way Chazal interpret this pasuk is that, again, the yesod, the fundamental concept is that one is not allowed to take a mashkin by force from another Jew. We spoke about the details of this last week. This is limiting it's certainly limiting the malva, the borrower himself. He's not allowed to take the mashkin from the person's home. And we saw, according to Chazal, that he's not even allowed to take the mashkin by force outside the person's home, right? So in the home, you're not allowed to take it, even if the guy's not there. You can't just sneak into his house, unwittingly take a collateral, which technically, monetarily speaking, you would be able to, right? Because the guy owes you the money, you have the right to do such a thing. But you're not allowed to enter his home to take a mashkin, even if you're not, knocking him against the wall and enforcing him. You can't go into his home to take the mashkin. And even outside the home, if you happen to find an object that he owns, you can theoretically take it, but you can't take it by force off the person, mamish, outside the home. So we're limiting the malva. We saw also, even last week, even Bezdin has limitations as well. When Bezdin comes and is going to collect collateral on your behalf, even they can't do it from within the person's home. They could do it by force outside of his home, but from within the person's home, they're not allowed to do that. That's the basic thing that we saw. That's the basic pasuk. Now, what we saw last week was different interpretations, different shittas within the Rishonim. What the fundamental? I think we have. We got to play more. So we saw from the Rishonim what the fundamental yesod of this mitzvah was, and in a certain sense, it boils down to really two camps, and that's really what we're going to be focused on a little bit more tonight. Basically, two concepts, two camps of how to view this prohibition. On the one hand, you can view this prohibition is that this is a prohibition that limits everyone. You could collect your debt, you could collect collateral, and Bezdin can collect collateral. But this is a new prohibition that's limiting the ability to do so by everybody. So the malva can't go into the person's home Bezdin can't go into the person's home. The Malva can't even do it outside the person's home by force. It's just basically limiting the ability to collect collateral. And possibly one explanation for that would be, as we mentioned last week, which is Rachmanis, it's mitzvah rachamim. We have there's many mitzvahs, Bez Hashem, over the coming weeks we'll see a bunch of them. There's a lot of other mitzvahs and prohibitions revolving around this inyan of collecting debts. And if you just read the psukim, the sense that you get from reading the psukim is that a lot of these halachas are rooted in Rachmanis. So for example, again, we're not going to go into this tonight, but the next pasuk talks about when you can't, in ways that you're allowed to collect collateral. If the person is a poor person, there are certain things that even for a poor person you're not allowed to take from him, things that he needs. And the way the pasuk conveys that is, ki nefeshu chayvel, you're taking his soul when you collect collateral objects that he needs to use. There's a certain sense of rachmanis that you have to have, even when you're dealing with a person that owes you money. So that could be one mahalach, one approach in understanding this mitzvah, which is it's rachmanis based, it's benodin lachaver based, and because of that, we're limiting how aggressive you're allowed to be with taking collateral. That's one approach. The other approach that we saw is different. It's not rachmanis based. It's not just limiting you or Bezdin's ability to collect collateral out of rachmanis for the person that owes the money. Rather, the fundamental yesod is that this is a Bezdin inyan. This is a Bezdin inyan. This is something that should be dedicated and set aside for Bezdin to take care of. And even within that approach, and that's the fundamental concept of why you as the lender, even though technically and monetarily speaking you should be able to go in and collect the collateral that you're owed, we don't allow you to do that, not because we have rachmanis on the guy that owes you the money. That's not the point. The point is this has to be something that's given to Bezdin. Bezdin should be handling this. Now what we saw is that even within that world, that Beis Medrash that views this not from rachmanis, but more of this is a Bezdin issue and it's their jurisdiction, what we saw was an extreme in the opinion of the Rambam, which is not only is this something that you're not allowed to handle, you have to allow Bezdin to do, even Bezdin has to do it, it has to be seen, the collecting of the collateral has to be seen as something that's happening in Bezdin. So even though you're not literally in the courthouse and it's the officer of the court that's handling this for you, but the officer of the court has to be seen as an extension of the court himself. And that's, so it's, in other words, fundamentally it's a Bezdin inyan. It's a Bezdin inyan. That was the idea that we saw. Now, what we're going to see tonight is there's an interesting machlokes in Achronim revolving around this mitzvah, this prohibition we're talking about. And I think, simply put, it really falls in line with these two camps. Is this fundamentally a Rachmanis dika prohibition, rooted in Rachmanis, and it just limits everyone's ability to aggressively take collateral? Or the concept is, there's a Bezdin issue, leave it to Bezdin. And you should not get involved if Bezdin is the one that's there to take care of it. So, it's like this. In Marmukah number 1, this is a piece from the Ksais, the famous great Ksais HaChoshen, one of the great Achronim. So in Siman Dalet and Choshen Mishpat, he talks about the following scenario. We know, a little background, we know that when it comes to, when a court case is going on, so let's say Reuven and Shimon come to court, and Reuven says, Shimon borrowed $100 from me, so he owes me $100. And Shimon denies it, it's not true, it's, never happened, I don't owe the money. Okay, so Bezdin, so Reuven has to show something, you gotta show something. If it's just random two people, I say you owe me money, you say you don't, but it's like, okay, so Shalom Aleichem, it says Shalom, we have nothing to do over here. So what can Reuven do to prove that Shimon owes him money? So there's all sorts of things. He could bring witnesses, he could bring a shtar, a document that indicates that the guy owed him money, something. Or in the very, very least, there's a concept in Allah, we're not going to get into too much detail of this because it's vast. There are certain tainas, even if let's say Reuven doesn't have witnesses, and he doesn't have a shtar. So what could he possibly do? So the one last thing that theoretically Reuven can do to at least force Bezdin to investigate, that there should be some din Torah over here. Because again, two people come to Bezdin, and Reuven says he owes me money, and Shimon says nothing doing, it's not true, and there's no proof, there's no nothing. The court didn't even there's no court case, there's nothing to talk about. The Bezdin won't even investigate the issue. So Reuven has to have something to at least start the process. So there is such a thing that Reuven can claim, which is a migu. What's a migu? A migu is a certain argument, a device, so to speak, an argument that that will compel Bezdin to take his argument seriously. And amigo means that instead of claiming X, I could have claimed Y. And if I claimed Y, I would for sure have power. And the fact that I'm not claiming Y, I'm claiming X, proves my point, right? So that's what amigo is. Amigo, since I could have claimed this other claim, and if I claimed that, then I would have ground to stand on, and now I'm not, so that's a little sort of, we'll say it in a simple way, that sort of proves my point. See, I'm a trustworthy guy, because if I wanted to lie, then I could have lied that. I could have done a much greater lie. That's the concept. So, what's a case of amigo? So a case of amigo is like this. Let's say Reuven comes into Bezdin, and he says, Shimon owes me $100. Shimon says, no, it's not true. I know what you're talking about. Bezdin says, no, you have the proof. There's no shtar, there's no Aiden. But Reuven says, but here, I do have something like this. In my car, I have Reuven's, I don't know, what's an expensive thing. I have Reuven's computer in my car. And everyone agrees it's Reuven's computer. It says on it, this is Reuven's computer. How do I have Reuven's computer? He asked me to watch it over the weekend when he went away. If I was a liar, and if I was a ganav, then you know what I would do? I just hold on to his computer. But I'm not doing that. I'm claiming that what? That he owes me $100. So in other words, my claim over his $100 is strong now. Why? Because if you just call me a liar and you don't want to acknowledge my claim, then I would just drive home with his computer and finish. The fact that I have an object of his, which I can theoretically hold on to, and no one will be able to say anything, because it's in my car and it's in my house, and I could just rip off the sticker that says it's Shimon's and finish, but I'm not doing that. I'm claiming that he owes me $100, so you should listen to my taina. That's called amigo. So the following case is interesting. Let's say Reuven knows that Shimon owes him $100. I know Shimon owes me $100, but I know I don't have Eidim, I don't have witnesses, I don't have a shtar. Can I go and just take one of his objects to put myself in this position where I could have amigo? I know it's true. Between me and God, I know Shimon owes me money, and I know he's going to deny it. But I know that if I, take his computer and put it in my car, I'll be able to get my $100. I'm not going to steal his computer. I'm just using it as a tactic to be able to have a taina. So you're allowed to do such a thing. So take a look at Maramaka number 1. So there's a ksais in Siman Daled in Shulchan Aruch. So Hashach, he quotes the Shach, the great Achron, the Shach, the Sefer Takva Kayin, in one of the Shach's farm. The Shach is known for his commentary in Chosh Mishra and Shulchan Aruch, but he had another Sefer called Takva Kayin. So in his Sefer Takva Kayin, Hela, the Shach comes out Halach L'Maisa, the Heicha de Brirale, that if it's clear to Reuven what the truth is. In other words, Reuven knows what the truth is, that Shimon owes him $100, and he knows with absolute clarity and certainty that Shimon's going to deny it. And he knows that if Shimon denies it, he has nothing, there's no proof, there's no nothing. So it's a mistake. Yochel litzvais be'inyan sheish l'amigo. Says the Shach, he would be allowed to take one of Shimon's objects to just give him the ability to have amigo, to give him ground to stand on, to claim the $100 that he's rightfully owed. Says the Shach, you're allowed to do such a thing. Okay. The Nira Pasha. So that's the Shach. Comes the Ksais, and the Ksais says, Dahainu davka hecha deleka lav d'leisavei al beis alav et avoita. Says the Shach, let's think about this for a second. What's the context over here? What does it mean that Shimon owes him $100? If Shimon owes him $100 because Reuven lent him money, so conceptually, says Ksais, by Reuven going and taking Shimon's computer and putting it in his car to give him now amigo to collect his debt, that's basically taking collateral. It's basically taking a mashkin. Right, what's the difference? I take a mashkin from you, I take a mashkin from you, and that is now forcing you to give me the money. That's basically what's going on over here. So says the Ksais, if that's the scenario, then you wouldn't be allowed to do that, to enter into his home and to take his computer, because that would be a violation of this prohibition of a malveh going into Levi's home and taking a mashkin. So says the Ksais, near Pasha, therefore it must be that when the Shach says this ruling that you can take his computer, and use it for amigo, it must be in a case of what? Of where you're avoiding this prohibition. How would you avoid the prohibition? So, for example, b'schiras va'arvas, let's say Shimon owes him money not because of a loan. Like we mentioned last week, that this prohibition is only when the money's owed because of a loan. If the guy owes you money because you worked for him, or he owes you rent, or whatever the situation is, other things that are not based on a loan, then this prohibition doesn't apply. Or another scenario would be, let's say I see his computer outside the house and he left it there. So that's also wouldn't be a violation of this prohibition. So says the Ksais, it has to be in those situations. Avu b'halva, but if it's straightforward halva, right, and the object that I want to take to make the migu is in the guy's home, take isr l'mashkenai, where there's a prohibition to take a mashkin, then aslei litzvais, then certainly the shach wouldn't say such a thing. I wouldn't be allowed to grab his object. The menatech netuchi also, because a malva is not allowed to take a mashkin by force. Ukamavur parakam akabel, like the Gemara Bamitzia says, like we saw last week. Vafil b'shuk taking it by force, he wouldn't be allowed to do even outside. Now says the Ksais, V're'isi rabim mischachmim b'zeh, and he says, but the truth is I've seen many people that are chachamim, ibra chachamim, they're very smart, they know a little shach here and there, and they use this as a tactic, litzvais mechaver ezechefetz, to use this, and they grab objects from people that owe them money, b'kdei shi'iloi migu, in order that they should have a better taina in Bezdin, kaidin ba'udin, before they go to Bezdin, v'lav shaper avdi. But in some situations it's okay, but if it's a case of halva and you're taking the object from the person's home or by force, lav shaper avdi, that's incorrect, karvla Torah, and you could be violating a prohibition from the Torah in wadei tvisa if you're doing it by force. So says the shach. So that would be, so says Ksais, the shach is correct, but certainly you can't violate this prohibition in order to do that. That's the Ksais' point. What's interesting is, you're going to ask something?
I was going to say, would a migu work if saying that I have the laptop as collateral on my car? That wouldn't work as a migu, right?
It would work. You could say like, because I could theoretically just pretend this never happened, and just keep the laptop.
Why is that a migu? That's a much stronger tie. Now look, here's my collateral for the loan that I gave you. It was $100.
No, it's not proof. It's not proof. It doesn't say on it, this is collateral for the loan. It just says it's. How did I get it? Because he lent it. He lent it to me, or he's going away. He wanted me to ask.
He's not claiming it as much though.
He's saying the fact that I have it in my house, I'm using that as proof that clearly I'm not a liar and it backs up my claim. But I'm not trying to collect the debt from it. I'm just trying to use it as a bargaining chip.
And if it was an actual mashkin, how would the claim look different without the migu? You say he owes me money and here's the proof. I have a laptop. That's collateral.
There wouldn't be a proof. I mean, conceptually it's the same idea. The point is usually a mashkin is we know the guy owes you money. And now Bezdin says, okay, so give him collateral in order to collect it at some point, to put pressure on him. So this is all the sheet of the Ksais. Okay, Mitzad Sheni, there's another one of the great Achronim called the Shar HaMishpat. The Marmukah number 2 also in Siman Dalet and Choshen Mishpat, he also quotes this shach, that Reuven would be allowed to take the guy's laptop in order to create the migu for himself, but he does not give the limitations of the Ksais. Says the Shar HaMishpat nearly, the Heicha Shekoifer Leichayvai. If again Shimon let's say it's a case of halva, it's a case of a loan, the case that the Ksais was trying to avoid. It's a case of a loan, and Shimon is denying it, and Reuven knows he's going to deny it, and Reuven knows he has no way to collect it at all, to convince Bezdin to look into it. Rishus biyadi lamashkenai shaloi be'edim. According to the shach, it would be permissible for Reuven to go into the guy's home and to take the laptop as a mashkin, in order, whatever you want to call it, in order to create this migu, in order that he should have this claim of like, see, I could have claimed the laptop to be mine to begin with, and I'm not, so it's a backup. So it backs up my claim that he owes me the money. Says the Shar HaMishpat, because even though he addresses the Ksais' issue, even though usually there's a prohibition of what? Of taking collateral from someone's home by force, even, right? In order to use it as a bargaining chip to force him to pay up the debt. That's only true when you have some where this where you can at least get Bezdin to compel the person to give you the mashkin. Bezdin can be involved. But in this case, where Reuven knows that there's nothing to do, Bezdin's not going to investigate the case. They're not going to open the case. They're going to completely ignore me. And Bezdin is not going to be able to do anything, and they're not going to have any motivation to investigate. You can take care of it yourself. So this is the machlokes. In a scenario, again, let's think about this for a second. A scenario, the average case is, again, we know, the average case is Reuven has proof that Shimon owes him money. He has Eidim, he has a shtar, and Bezdin knows it. And now the question is, the guy's not paying the debt. So now you want to get collateral. So then the normal situation is this prohibition. You can't go in by force. You get Bezdin to do it. Even Bezdin is limited. But but we're talking about a case of where there's clear proof that Reuven can bring that Shimon owes him money. Now we have a new scenario. There's no Reuven knows Shimon owes him money, but there's no way for Reuven to prove it. And the only way, and Bezdin's not going to get involved. The only thing Reuven can do is get this collateral in order to give himself a time. So you have this machlokes. The Ksai says he's not allowed to do it. This is still a prohibition in place. And the Shar Mishpat says no prohibition in this case. You can do it. What's the issue? Yeah.
According to Shar Mishpat, it's specifically only when you're doing it as to have a migu, or what if it's not a guy owes me money and I have no proof? I'll just go into his house and take collateral because I know he's not going to pay me back. Forget about the migu.
Yeah. So theoretically, it would be the same thing.
Because
the
the
same thing. The
does
Yisur
not
B'chal does not apply if Bezdin, if there's nothing that that could allow Bezdin to get involved in the scenario in the case. So what's the Yisur Machlokes?
So the core halacha is when there is a star alone.
When there's something that right, exactly.
And then
So
you
what's
can
the
go into the house.
right, and then there's we'll see in a second how Bezdin would go about doing it. Bezdin has their ways, but the fundamental Yisod, I think, is basically boiling down to the two ways of thinking about this prohibition we started with. Again, we started with two ways of thinking. Is this a prohibition that is fundamentally limiting everyone's scope, and it's fundamentally rooted in Rahmanas? There's rules about how to collect loans. There's rules how to collect collateral. That's just the way it is. Maybe it's out of compassion. Maybe you want to call it exercise kassav, but it's just limiting your ability to collect. Well, in that case, then the Ksais is absolutely right. This is a prohibition that's in place on everybody. It's a prohibition on Bezdin. It's a prohibition on the one that lends the money. You're not allowed to collect collateral to compel a person to pay the debt by force. It's all finished. Cheshbainis, you have proof, you have other proofs, it's different. There's a prohibition in place. But if you say that the fundamental yesod of the prohibition is, this is not your Indian, this is Bezdin's Indian. This is Bezdin's Indian. This is beyond your jurisdiction. Regular scenarios, you wanna collect your rent, do it. Collecting loans, leave it to Bezdin. Well, says the Shar Mishpat, okay, but that's in a case of where Bezdin is able to get involved. But if you're talking about a scenario where Bezdin can't get involved, their hands are tied. There's nothing that Reuven can do to open a case in Bezdin. So then says the Shar Mishpat, well, this halacha won't apply. I mean, the whole prohibition is fundamentally rooted on this assumption, which is that Bezdin can get involved. And once this is a case, this is a scenario that is at least something that's under the jurisdiction of Bezdin, so then comes a prohibition that says, and leave it to Bezdin. Don't take matters into your own hands. But if this is not a matter that Bezdin can get involved with, then the prohibition is not discussing that scenario. Says the Shar Mishpat, and then you can get involved yourself. So this is the aside. Says the Shar Mishpat, because the fundamental idea of the prohibition is leave it to Bezdin. Well, then that's assuming that this is a scenario that Bezdin can get involved in, and they could somehow figure out ways to compel the guy. They could at least catch him when he's holding a laptop outside and get the laptop from him. They could do something. But if this is a scenario Bezdin can't get involved because Reuven has no proof of anything, then the prohibition of leave it to Bezdin obviously doesn't apply. This is not a Bezdin Indian. There's nothing they can do to open the case. So then do it by yourself. So this machlokes between the Ksais and the Shar Mishpat fundamentally is rooted on this Indian. Is this a Bezdin dika? Is this prohibition basically saying leave it to court? But that's assuming that court can get involved. Or, no, there's nothing to leave it to court. This is a stam. There's a prohibition of Rahmanis. You're not allowed to take collateral from someone for a debt by force. Finished. I don't care why or who, Bezdin, not Bezdin. This is a prohibition on everybody. And in that case, I don't care if Bezdin is getting involved or not. You're not allowed to do such a thing. That's exercise. So that's the fundamental machlokes. Now, just to show a little bit even more, until now, so we're painting a picture where like, okay, so what happens? So what's going to be? Like, okay, so Reuven has witnesses, let's say, or he has a dong. He proves that Shimon owes him money. And it's time to pay. And Shimon's not paying. So he goes to court. And court says Shimon has to pay, or at least you're allowed to collect the collateral. And Shimon's like, I'm not giving it. So if you think about it, like, Bezdin's very limited. What could they do right now? So if they catch Shimon, like, outside his home with something, or if they catch him, if let's say Shimon has his car in the driveway, the driveway might be in his rishus, I don't know, on the street, or whatever it is, he has a boat somewhere, whatever it is. So fine. So Bezdin can take things by force outside the guy's home. But if the person doesn't have stuff outside his home, and all of his property is in his house, so then everyone's limited. The Malva can't do anything. Bezdin can't do anything. More than that, we're going to see in a second how limiting this halacha is. Not only is the malva or even bezdin not allowed to enter in the person's home to take something, they're not even. We're going to see in a second. They're not even allowed to enter into the person's home to scare him or to even talk to him about this. Take a look. Take a look at Marmukah number 3. So this is a line from the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat, Siman Tzadi Zayin. In Tzadi Zayin, that's where a lot of these halachas are talked about. And says the Ramah, a huge chumrah, says the Ramah Hagah, Va'afilu im bikei shamalva. Let's say the malva comes to Bez and he says, listen, we all know Shimon owes me money. I proved that months ago. And we all know that it's time for him to pay, and he's not paying. I just want collateral. And I know, says Ruvain, you guys can't go into his house to take it. I know that. And I know that he doesn't have a car, and he has no property outside. Everything's in his house. So all I'm asking you, says Reuven, Reuven says to Bezin, I'm just asking you, go into his house and just take inventory. Just take inventory of everything he owns, and then at some point, maybe when I make the arrangements with him, he won't be able to then claim, I don't have any money. Just figure, at least do that. Says the Ramah, Afilu in bikei shemalva liikanis lebeis aloyve v'lichtev kol ma shebebeisa. Even if the malva's request is nothing more than just for Bezdin or to allow him entrance into the loive's home, to the borrower's home, just to take stock and inventory, that I should see if he has funds, and then maybe I'll try to talk to his cousin, that his cousin should talk to him. Something, just I should be able to have something to say. Ein Bezdin is kalkin like liikanis lebeis klal. Even that we won't allow. Now it's interesting. Where did we get that from? It's one thing you're not going to his home to take collateral. I get that, but just to look around. So if you take a look at Marmukah number 4, the Sma, it's one of the great Achronim also on the Shulchan Aruch, and he explains the source of the Ramah. It's very interesting. He says Midek Pida Torah v'Kasva, and it's a diak from the pasuk. Again, you don't have the pasuk in front of you, but just I'll read it to you outside. The pasuk says again, Kisash v'Recha Mashas Muma. If you lend someone some money, you're not allowed to enter his home to take the mashkin. Rather, you have to stay outside. And the person that owes the money, he brings the mashkin out to you. Says the Sma, I don't understand. If the scenario is that the loiva is giving you the mashkin, then why do you have to be outside? In other words, all the pasuk has to say is, don't go into his home to take the mashkin, let him give it to you. But it doesn't just say that. It says, don't go into his home to take the mashkin, he has to give it to you, but you have to be outside. The indication is that even if he's giving you the mashkin, you're not even allowed to be in his home to compel that. Anything that's relevant to receiving a mashkin has to happen outside. It cannot happen inside. Even if it's something as benign and as subtle as just taking inventory. That's already a violation of b'chutz tamid, of remaining outside while the mashkin is presented to you. So that's how limited this is. That forget taking the mashkin. That's real prohibition. But even if you're not taking the mashkin, you're just trying to compel the situation where he'll give it to you. You can do that only from the outside. Even that you can't do on the inside. So if you want to take binoculars and try to, spy in the guy's house, to figure out what he has, that's fine. But you can't do it inside the house. Says the Sma, Midek Pida Torah, from the fact that Torah is makbid v'kosva, and it writes that b'chutz tamoid, that even when the loiv is giving you the mashkin, you have to remain outside. Mashma the knisa l'tzarech ha'avud, entering into the home for the purposes of getting the collateral. Afilu lo yavet, even if it's not by force, us. More than this, the Chavetz Chaim in Marmukah number 5, the Chavetz Chaim in the Sefer Avos Chesed, based on this concept, goes further than the Ramah. Not only are you now allowed to enter into his home to take stock and inventory of what he has, to eventually use that against him, says the Chavetz Chaim, I feel laharbis olav sham b'dvarim. Even if I want to go into his home and I want to just yell and scream at him, I want to try to convince him and compel him to give me the mashkin, you're not allowed to do that in his home. And again, I'm not going to take it by force. It's not my kavanah. I want to get him to give it to me. And I want to convince him with language, with words. Even that you're not allowed to do in the person's home. It's a mashkin gamkein aser el yame b'chutz. The conversation has to be done outside. And the person can give you the mashkin, but you can't do it by force on any level. Now again, first of all, again, just to make this clear, if the loiva on his own, without being asked, without being compelled, wants to give the mashkin, and he's just, the only place he can meet is in his home, then that's fine. We're talking about where you're trying to get it from him. Maybe it's by force, or maybe it's by, trying to coercion. When you're trying to do it, that can't be in the guy's home. If he wants to give on his own, that's fine. But if there's any level of force or coercion or compelling, it cannot be done in the person's home. So, and that's true again. That's true for the malva, and that's true for Bezdin too. So Bezdin is pretty limited over here. Again, if they find the guy's property outside, they can take it. But if there's no property outside, then everyone's pretty limited. So the question that the Rishonim deal with is, okay, so what happens if the guy doesn't have any property outside? You must just get away scot-free from this.
Is there an offshoot of Kaldal and over here? Is that kind of
so that's something that the Rishonim deal with. They don't talk about the language of Kaldal Gavar, but it's Ovid Inish Din Lanafshe. It's a similar idea of taking matters into your own hands, but this halacha is limiting that.
That's specifically where Bezin takes a back seat, right?
Yeah.
So
That's Kaldal Gavar. But over
This
here,
is-
this is limiting to everyone. Even the Malva is limited. The Malva is even more limited than Bezin. It's an Issa. So this is the question the Rishonim deal with, which is, okay, so Lamaisa, so what's going to be if Shimon just, I'm staying in my home, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not bringing anything out, that's it, finished. So what do you do? So take a look at Marmot number 6. So this is a Rosh in Bava Metzia. Okay, Bava Metzia Pertes Siman Mem Vav. And this is a Chiddush from the Rosh, and this is going to transition us back into Pnimis a little bit. Tema asks the Rosh, Dim lo yimtzeuhu. So if Bezdin doesn't find this guy outside his home, right, and he don't find any property, how could they compel him? Practically speaking, how could they get the money out of Shimon? So you're going to tell me they can never. L'maisa, paying up a loan is a mitzvah, and one of the obligations of Bezdin is to enforce mitzvahs. And Bezdin has the responsibility to enforce people to keep mitzvahs. So in other words, so the Rosh is making it more of like a halachic question, not just like stam, how could this be? Like halachically, how could Bezdin fulfill their obligation of compelling someone to keep the mitzvah of paying back a debt if they're limited? They can't do anything about it. So what do we do? So says the Rosh, a huge chiddush. Says the Rosh with the commentary of Rabbeinu Tam, it's okay. What does Rabbeinu Tam say? The Mefarish says Rabbeinu Tam a chiddush. The loy mari b'mashkin lepirayin. Says the Rabbeinu Tam a huge chiddush that this entire prohibition, with all of its details, everything that we've been talking about, is only when the object that you want to collect is not going to be used for payment itself. It's only for collateral or to use it as a bargaining chip, something. But you're not interested in actually collecting your debt from this object. That's when the prohibition kicks in. El shoretz lias patuch moisav. You want an insurance policy. You want the collateral. Al kishoretz li farmim. That was the whole situation. The time has come for the debt to be collected, but you're not forcing the collection of the debt. You just want collateral. That's when this prohibition kicks in. But if you're trying to get what? To get what you call it?
In his case.
His case, payment, right? Payment, says Rabbeinu Tam. That's a classic mitzvah of payment. Payment is the mitzvah. Bezdin enforces. They go in, they break the door down, they beat you up. Finished. So it's really up to you. If you want collection, then all bets are off. If you want a mashkin, then you're limited. It's a chiddush from Rabbeinu Tam. El shoretz li isbetoch meisav, al kishoretz li farim menu, nichnatz lebesek mashkin. Finished. Bezdin goes in and takes it. It's a chiddush from Rabbeinu Tam. It's a chiddush of the Rosh.
Only through Bezdin or he himself?
So that's the machlokes. There are different versions of this Rabbeinu Tam. The way the Rosh quoted it is, from the context, he's talking about Bezdin. Because the question started off with the obligation of Bezdin to enforce mitzvahs, and says Rabbeinu Tam, if it's for collection, they can do it. Other Rishonim, when they quote this Rabbeinu Tam, they say it across the board. Forget Bezdin. You yourself can also go in and to collect your debt. So that seems to be... Then the question is like, okay, does the Rosh mean not like other Rishonim? But there's different nuschais in Rabbeinu Tam.
How do we touch avoitai? Is that an article of clothing? Avoitai?
No, so avid. So that's what we're going to see in the Pnimis over here. Avid pashut means a mashkin. It means collateral.
Leaving the person is poor his clothing.
That's the next pasuk is about that. That'll be the next mitzvah that we'll talk about. That's something else. But this is talking about something, any object, rich or poor, it doesn't make a difference. But it's a mashkin. And again, that's where Rabbeinu Tam is coming from. The pasuk says mashkin. Right? Mashkin means, simply put, I'm not trying to collect the debt from it. This is a bargaining chip, collateral. It's an insurance policy. That's where the pasuk is limited. Now, what's interesting is in Marmukah number 7, the Nemuki Yosef, one of the Rishonim as well from the Beis Medrash of the Ramban, Rajba, the Sfarash Rishonim. So he quotes, in fact, a machlokes about this. So if you take a look, what he says again, there's also in Bava Metzia, Samach Tesem Beis, the tshuva sarif. So first, the Nemuki Yosef quotes a tshuva from Ben Yitzchak Al-Fasi from the Rif, which the Rif doesn't really clearly say it 100%, but it definitely sounds like Rabbeinu Tam. And the Rif says like this: Imaloiva Elaim, if the loiva, the borrower, is a tough guy, v'ra ma'alolim, and he's a no goodnik, and he's not doing the right thing. Umei is panim milafroy, and he's chutzpahdik, and he's not paying. He's pasha not paying. So mutter likanas lebeisai ladas as mitzvaynav afilo de shliach akum. Then in that situation that he's not paying, and again, the Rif is not 100% clear, but most likely it means and you want to get paid, and that's the like the language he's saying. He's not paying. In other words, and you want him to get paid. You want to get paid. So then you go into a Zoom and take it and finish. Do what you have to do. So in other words, the way the Rishonim quote this. They quote it in conjunction with Rabbeinu Tam. That's probably how they understood the Rif, meaning that if the guy's not paying and that's what you're interested in doing, these limitations don't apply.
For the Russian Rabbeinu Tam, they can't hold Rachmanis is the svar, right? Because
That's what we're going to see. If it's Rachmanis, it's a little bit hard to say. Unless you make the argument that there's always two sides to every story. Rachmanis on him, what are Rachmanis on me? So it's one thing if I'm just trying to collect collateral, okay, but I need to get paid. So my children, my family's starving. So it's like I got Rachmanis on him. He's the one doing something wrong. I'm the victim, right? Yeah. So it's one of those things. Like it's part of human nature that that we always tend to have Rachmanis on the guy on the person that something's being taken from them, right? Like the 1%, they're the terrible, and it's the Amoinah, if he worked hard for his money. So, and he gave of himself to Meiser Nefesh to lend money, and now he needs the money back. So why is there Rachmanis on him more than me? So again, if it's a matter of just collateral, okay, so fine. So maybe because if I'm just collecting collateral, it means I'm not desperate yet. I don't really need the money yet. I just want to. Fine, then you have Rachmanis. But if it's so he says there's no Rachmanis on me if I need the money. So I guess you can make that argument. But that's the sheet of Rabbeinu Tam and possibly the rest.
So it would bring in richer poor.
Huh? Maybe, yeah. So again, the Gzeras HaKassos don't get. Sometimes they do, but that's the Shuv of the Rif. Now it says the Nemuki Yosef in the second line, though, in the last Marmukah, the Sefer HaTrumas Kasav. However, he records from a Sefer HaTrumas. Also, one of the Rish. There's two. There's a couple Sefer HaTrumas. There's one that's Ashkenaz and one that's Sfard. This is a Sfard one. So Kasav, he writes, "Ein lasses came." That's incorrect. Not Rabbeinu Tam, not the Rif. This prohibition applies even to payment. You're not allowed to do such a thing. Ella, what is a scenario where Bezdin can go and mamish just break the guy's door down and get the money? Tzedakah taxes, collecting tzedakahs that the city's obligated to pay, not loans. Shaloi bo al derech halva, because those are not loans. And there's no prohibition in those cases. Avol milva, but when it comes to a loan, that we have a clear prohibition of what? Of going to the person's home and taking the collateral. Ein kaich b'yadin laker mitzvah. Al b'kaishi gada. Says the Sefer HaTrumas, again, so the Sefer HaTrumas is disagreeing. He's saying, no. This limitation, this prohibition, even though the pasuk says amashkin, it doesn't mean only. It means even collateral. Well, the more so you can't collect the debt by force. It applies to everything. So what? So according to Sefer HaTrumas, so what could be done? Says the Sefer HaTrumas, you're right. You're very limited with what that can be done. The only thing that Bezdin can do is laker hamitzvah. There are scenarios where Bezdin, according to the timing and according to the situation, Bezdin has the right to violate mitzvahs for the sake of society functioning. And that would be the only thing Bezdin is allowed to do. So there is no heter really. There's just violating the mitzvah if need be for the sake of society. And says the Sefer HaTrumas, "Ein kaich b'yadeinu laker mitzvah b'kaishi gadol." That should only be done with great severity and seriousness. V'shei kavonas bezdin l'shem shemayim, and Bezdin has to make sure they're doing this l'shem shemayim, not just to show their strength. Kedarmin, there is such an idea. Bezdin makin v'oinshim shalom and adin, that you can have scenarios where Bezdin will give punishments and enforce their rulings shloika halacha, against halacha, because that's a situation that's necessary for that moment, and that will be what you're allowed to do. But just to go in because there's a time of payment, that you're not allowed to do. And again, what can happen? If Bezdin determines in this particular situation, if we allow Shimon to get away with it, Levi's going to abuse it, and Yehuda's going to abuse it, and it's not going to be good for the klal. Okay, then they could violate the mitzvah and do what they have to do, because Bezdin has that right sometimes, like Hira Shah, to do something that the klal needs. But you're right. There's no halachic like heter built into this. Really, it doesn't work like that. That's the now halach lamaisa. The Shulchan Aruch quotes Rabbeinu Tam. The Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat quotes Rabbeinu Tam as Yesh Aimrim. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't quote any dissenting view. Just there are those that say the heter Rabbeinu Tam, that if you're trying to collect it as payment, it can be done by force. And it quotes it as a Yesh Aimrim. Whenever the Shulchan Aruch quotes something as a Yesh Aimrim, so you always have to see if it quotes a dissenting view. If it quotes a dissenting view, then the opinion that it quotes as those that say is not going to be held so strong. But if there's no dissenting view, then usually the assumption is that the Shulchan Aruch quotes it as a Yesh Aimrim, because literally not everyone says it. It's Rabbeinu Tam, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we disagree with it. Just Yesh Aimrim. It's not a Gemara. It's those that say. But so Allah L'maisa will assume like Rabbeinu Tam. Now let's transition from there into Pnimius. So it's an interesting thing. That this whole limitation, this whole mitzvah, this whole prohibition, all this is only like as limiting as it is, but it's only in a particular scenario where I'm just trying to get this object as collateral. But if I switch my thinking and I actually want Pirayan, it's completely fine. So again, it's Gezeres HaKasef, this is this, Maybe you could say because of Rachmanis. In Pnimius, where is this coming from? So we mentioned this last week, that the aside of this mitzvah in Pnimius, as the Kamaran explained, is coming from a fundamental aside, which is that the concept of halva. Let's take a step back for a second, just for a few minutes. One of the other limitations of this prohibition is that this is only, that's what we've seen a few times, this is only when it comes to halva. When a person, when Shimon owes Reuven money because Reuven lent him money, and he wants to get paid back of his debt, that's when these prohibitions kick in. But if Shimon owes him money for something else, for rent, or for wages, or whatever, this prohibition doesn't apply. It's dafka halva. What's the aside? Again, Gezeres HaKasef. So in Pnimius, the way to think of it is like this. Whenever a person does a mitzvah, what's halva? What's a loan? We know that money, in Tanakh we find this in many places, in Sfar Makdashim as well. Money, people feel very attached to their money. Even more so than their objects sometimes. It's the money that they feel very attached to. So why is that? Even in this parasha, the pasuk describes kan nefesh huchayvo, that a person's money is on some level connected to their soul. It's their soul. See, money is sort of everything and nothing. What is it? It could be anything. It could turn it into whatever you want. But what it is right now is mamash nothing. In a certain sense, that's Nishmas Yisrael. Because what is the Jewish soul? We're gonna speak quickly right now, and a lot of you said this over here, but the Jewish soul in its very essence and very root is nothing. All it is a clear lens through which the Rabbanu Shalom comes into the world. That's what Nishmas Yisrael is. Nishmas Yisrael is nothing. And so there's a very strong connection between Nishmas Yisrael and money. This is what the enemies of our people have picked up on this, right? And you could have, you could have Yidden living in Shtadlach, and they mamish have nothing. But the Cossacks think that they have all the money. Well, what money? What? We're living in a hovel. They don't know what they're saying, but they pick up on some truth, that there's some connection between Nishmas Yisrael and Kesef and money. Even the word Kesef, which is money, comes from the word Kisufim, which is longing and desire. Nichsef, nichsafti. Means the essence of who you are is your desires. Your desires express who you are in the deepest senses, and your money as well. There's a strong bond between those two things. And so let's think about this for a second. What is Avodas Hashem? Every mitzvah that we do, there's a certain relationship, there's a certain system that's taking place with every single mitzvah, and that is through the particular mitzvah that we're doing, whether it be Luv and Esrog, Tefillah, Mezuzah, you name it, davening, learning. What you're doing is that you're taking your neshama and you're taking things of this world with your neshama and you're bringing it to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Bring it to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And kiviyachol, it's almost as if the higher world is missing something, and they're missing something. They need something. They need a loan. They need a loan. They need your money. They need your nefesh. All of Yiddishkeit is about Mesiras Nefesh. Every mitzvah that we do is about doing this act as a way to allow our nefesh to return to the higher world. On some level, without death, but on some level, that tachtoinen, that the lower worlds ascending to the higher world through the Jewish person performing mitzvahs, that's a loan. It's a loan. It's a person taking money and giving it to you. That's taking a part of my neshama and giving it to you. Every mitzvah is doing that. And so that's step one. And then what's step two? There's a reciprocation. The halacha is that when I give a loan, milva l'hitzadnitna. Milva l'hitzadnitna means that when I lend you $100, it's your $100 now. And then when you pay me back, you're paying me back now with your $100. So an amazing thing just takes place with a loan. A part of me, I give to you. And in response, a part of you, you give to me. That's what halva is. And that's what mitzvahs are. Mitzvahs are, I give part of myself to God, and in response, God gives a part of himself to me. And the fundamental point of this mitzvah, as we saw last week, is to make sure that I don't force the issue, that I don't take a mashkin by force. And when we saw what that meant is, by the Kamarna, Rebbe explained that what it means is that when the Rabbanu Shalom is giving me back, it could be in two ways. He can say, okay, you know what, fine, just here's money. Or the payment can be proper, which is he gives of himself. And we spoke about this, that the Indian of Hashem giving of himself with the gifts that he gives us. So he owes us kiviyachol for the mitzvahs that we do, but there are ways. But if we violate this prohibition of taking the mashkin by force without the loiva being wanting to give it on his own, then what the reverberation of that in heaven is the Rebbeinu Shalom will pay us back for our mitzvahs, but not in the way that he's giving of himself. It's against his will, so to speak. And so what you'll receive are good things and payment, but it's not with the nefesh of the loiva. It's not with the nefesh of the borrower. It's not with the nefesh of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's against his will, so he'll give you good things. This is why, number one, it's dafka halva. And this is also why the secret of Rabbeinu Tam is like this, because we explained that in the terminology of the Sarmak Daishan, this dynamic is the following idea. The idea is that you have HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina, right? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu means who God is, Kiviyachol, and the Shechina means the things that God, the side of God that He's giving to us. And what we want to ensure is that as we're receiving from the Shechina, that it comes with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the same time. Again, Hashem Echad, Hashem is one. But these two sides, if I'm not giving, like the Zohar gives a mashal of a person that's feeding a guest, which is face to face with eye contact, versus feeding a dog, where you just throw him the scrap from behind your shoulder without even looking at the dog. So both people, both guests are receiving. But one is receiving not just the Shechina, it's receiving from HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Shechina. So there's a part of the Balabas, there's who the Balabas is, and then there's who he is as the provider of the guest in his home. So as the provider of the guest in his home, he's giving to the dog. But who the Balabas is, he's not giving to the dog. He's giving only the side of him that's the provider, and who he is are connected to each other when he gives his guest face to face. And so that's what we want to happen when the Rebbeinu Shalom pays us back. We want the schar to come from Kutchebrichu Ushchinte, from the source, from the cause of all things, the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, and the effect, and the Shechina. That's what we talked about last week with Bezdin, right? That Bezdin is the source of the Psak, which is the Pol Yotzei. The Shechina would be the Psak, the Bezdin is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the concept is we want them to be united in Hava. So in that context, the Shita of Sefer HaTrumas makes a lot of sense. Not only is this necessary in terms of collecting a mashkin, but in terms of collecting the debt itself, all the more so. Because the whole idea is that the payment should not just be money, it should be a piece of the loiva. And we want the everything to be baratzim. We want everything to be baratzim. Not only do we want the guy to get his money back, we want it to be in such a way where the loiv is giving of himself, and that has to be with will. And so, the Sefer Trumas makes a lot of sense. If we want to make sure that we are not just receiving from the Shechina, we're receiving from the Shechina with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it means that none of any money, of any schar being taken from a loan should be compelled. It should all be baratzim. So what's the side of Rabbeinu Tam? So the Gemara again doesn't talk about Rabbeinu Tam. He doesn't get into these details, but the Gemara makes a point. So you mentioned that the language of the pasuk is very interesting. The language of the pasuk always uses to describe this mashkin is not the word mashkin, right? Doesn't use mashkin. The word is avot. Ayin beis tes. So the Gemara says an amazing thing. Ayin beis tes is Rosh Tevis av ayin beis tes. You know what I mean? Means ayin beis is 72. Right? Ayin is 70, the base is 2, 72. Test, 72 times 10. Ayin base, test times. Okay? 72 times 9, which is test, equals Begematria Targum. Targum is Aramaic. I can't, one in the world. So Targum, so in the Svarim like this, so this it's based on the Kisvei. The Kisvei describes that in language we have the similar dynamic of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shechina. Lashon HaKodesh, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Kivyochel. Again, it's not Hashem, obviously, but it's reflective of who Hashem is. That's Hashem's language that He speaks, when He's home. And then there's Targum. What's Targum? What's Aramaic? It's not the 70 languages, so it's still within the context of Kedusha. It's still within the world of holiness. But it's already moving out. It's how Lashon HaKodesh is expressed outwardly. So Lashon Kodesh is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Targum is the Shechina. That's why the word Targum also equals numerically the word Tardema, which means to be asleep. And Tardema is the word that's used when it describes Adam being put to sleep to allow Chava to develop. Adam and Chava is also the same dynamic. Husband and wife, male and female. The male always represents the essence, and the female always represents how to take that essence and manifest it outwardly. How to take it to the next stage. Stage 2, cause and then effect. Source and result. And the Keva always represents the Shechina. Shechina is feminine. The language, the word Shechina is feminine. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is male. It's masculine. So the word Targum, which is the Shechina, is also the same Mashir as Tardema, which is how Chava, the first woman, developed. So this, in other words, like this. In concept, the Sefer Chumas is correct. That the concept of taking payment for a halva, any level of payment, it should always be brasim. But Rabbeinu Tam's, the secret of Rabbeinu Tam is coming from the language of the word avit. That the word avit, it's dafka the mashkin, which is again synonymous with the word avit. The avit, which is ayin base times 9, which is gematria targum, is specifically addressing this. That it's dafka when an avit is taken against the will. That's the meaning of taking the Shechina away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kivyochel Chas v'Shalom. And so it's that inyan, that problem which this prohibition is trying to avoid, of taking the Shechina away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and making that separation and getting things but not getting the source of it at the same time, it's specifically activated. That problem is specifically activated when an avit is taken. Not when Pirayin is taken, but when the avit is taken. And this is something we find very often in Torah and Pnimis Torah specifically, is that sometimes there's a focus on concept, and sometimes there's a focus on the language, on the Isis. The Torah, there's all of Torah on the deepest of levels is one long stream of divine names, and the reality of these prohibitions are being manifest and activated based on the language of the pasuk. And so, in terms of the language of the pasuk and the gematrias of the psukim, the only time that the Shechina is being ripped away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only when the avit is being taken against its will, because that's what the word avit means. It means the Shechina, and that's where Rabbeinu Tam is coming from. Whereas the Sefer Chumas is not focused on the language of the word; he's talking about the concept. The concept is we don't want money to be taken from the loiv against his will, but in terms of the particular scenario that's specifically in language and the Oisias HaTorah being connected to the Shechina, it's Dafka Rabbeinu Tam with the avit. And so that's the side over here, and this is what's going on. That's why, in a certain sense, in a certain sense, this is what caused everything is, listen, everything is on some level. Zelu mezeh so'ol hakim. Chazal say that the source of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash was because Shloi Baruch Hu b'Torah Tchila, because they didn't make Birchas HaTorah first before they learned. So everyone knows what that's such a huge avera. So it's well known. The Bach, Bais Chodesh, the Bach writes that it wasn't like that's a big avera. Them not making Birchas HaTorah first means that they looked at Yiddishkeit as just about reward, just about pras. But the Noisen, it was all about the Shechina. It was all about taking the Shechina, but by force. But the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, they weren't really interested in, and that reflected itself in them not making the bracha before learning. Learning represents all of Yiddishkeit, and not recognizing the giver of the Torah before you learn means that you're not interested in the giver. You're interested in the object. You're interested in the pras. So, in other words, on some level, the origin of Churban Beis Hamikdash was the Jewish people violating this prohibition of entering the home to take by force the mashkin. So, Mida Keneged Mida, the house of the Rebbeinu Shalom, was also taken by storm by the nations of the world. The house of the Jewish people, Beis Hamikdash. So this is a little bit hinted to in the Gemara himself also. He says that by violating this prohibition, Chas v'Shalom causes Churban Beis Hamikdash. So it's probably something along these lines. By not keeping Yiddishkeit with the ultimate objective of trying to have the Noisin HaTorah, of making sure that the Yichud of Kodesh Baruch Hu Shechina is intact. So by violating that, that's the prohibition of Leisavei al Beisai Lavei Tavoitai. Don't rip the Shechina out of the home against her will while she's in a state of Yichud with Kodesh Baruch Hu. By doing so, Mida Keneged Mida, the Messiah are going to come and do such a thing like that, and that's what Churban Beis Hamikdash is. So what's the tikkun? Okay, so the tikkun is don't violate this prohibition, don't violate it the pashtas, and it means also to make Birchas HaTorah and to keep all of Yiddishkeit, not to be makabel pras, but to be makabel schar. Like we said last week, that schar already means I want the gifts I want the Rebbeinu Shalom's, I want my money back, but I want my money with the rutzen of the loiva. I want it with the nefesh of the Rebbeinu Shalom at the same time, and that's why I'm ultimately doing mitzvahs to receive that reward, to have that hiskashas and that dvekas, and that's ultimately what Yiddishkeit's about. You do that, you get the Beis Hamikdash back. As Hashem to experience that. B'Pal Mamish, v'Yeskal Tzedek, may every menu on me.
Amen.
Thank you.